of that special education classroom that seems to be the last resort for a child who is struggling to find their place in the school. That's exactly why I brought Sam to the Special Education Inner Circle podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Witcher, and we're going to tackle some of the tough topics that come around that special education classroom that feels like the last resort. So Sam, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
Yeah, this is going to be a great conversation. So tell us, what's your role at the IEP table?
Absolutely. I have been a special education teacher for 7 years now. I've worked primarily in the self-contained setting, specifically with students with emotional and behavioral disorders. So that's kind of my specialty. I will be transitioning into a new role as a behavioral consultant for my corporation this coming year. So I'm very excited about that transition. IEPs are my thing. I know a lot of people dread them. A lot of people don't like writing them. And, there's just something about putting together the supports and programming for kids that really comes to light when we all sit at a table and we all talk about what's best for that student and really put it into that one workable document.
I am in love with that kind of description from the inside of that. If anybody gets emails from me, when I'm talking about IEPs, I always sign it with hope and determination always.
Yes.
And that's what I'm hearing. I'm like, yes, you're hopeful and you're determined and there's opportunities. But your classroom, when we first met, you were like, my classroom's kind of like the last resort. And I was like, yes, I knew exactly what you were talking about when you said that, because there's a perception of this last resort classroom. So describe a little bit to somebody what that might mean.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like we get so many students who their needs are really diverse. Their behaviors are extreme, and we really come to a point and we ask ourselves, what are we doing? Where are we going with the student? What is best for this student? And, when we talk about that self-contained placement, honestly, that's a really good support for a lot of students. However, it is really viewed as a here's the last resort kind of mentality. And I feel like for our program and our classroom, we really wanted to put a spin with parents and put a spin with the team that this isn't a last resort, that we can really look at this as a fresh start. I think when we look at those self-contained placement supports, we can really, really hone in on what that student needs, what supports look like, really focus on those relationships with that student, but then how can we transition those supports out into that general education environment? Because ultimately, when we talk about those self-contained placements, we always want to move kids back out into that least restrictive environment where are they the most successful. And so I really felt that it was my job to educate parents that this is not the last resort. This is not the end. This is a new start. It's a fresh beginning where we can figure out what works for your child and really get them to be successful and really, maximize their potential.
Yeah. And a lot of times, you brought up the term least restrictive environment. I love it. We love to get a little nerdy with all of our jargon around here. So everybody, least restrictive environment, LRE, right? So we talk about this, in a way that general education would be less restrictive and self-contained classroom would be more restrictive. But there's many times that a self-contained room gives more freedom, gives more independence. It is the least restrictive because the child can learn this independence at a whole different level without maybe some of the things that weren't going so good when we were, had a classroom at 30 kids and things couldn't be individualized. So I love that you say it's not the last resort. It's a fresh start. It's not a dead end. I know something else that, is close to your heart is this concept of relationships with children. So let's just go there. Let's go there because there's a lot of things you scroll Instagram and everywhere, everybody's like relationships first, all the other things that we think about school, that needs to come second. So bring it.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm going to debunk the relationship stigma right now. And, being a self-contained teacher and really working specifically with students with the behavioral disorders, we know relationships are key for them. We know relationships empower students. When we think about a lot of our students who come from diverse backgrounds and specifically trauma, I mean, what the data tells us is that the more positive people we put in a child's life, the more likely they're going to develop resilience, and really kind of not overcome the trauma, but be able to kind of work through that. I think what has become skewed is that we are using a relationship as a form of classroom management. And I really think they can coincide together. And we don't have to keep them mutually exclusive from each other. And fortunately, I feel like that's kind of what's been brought about, is that we can't have management without relationships. But that's just really not true. We can have both of those. And building relationships with students is not a classroom management strategy. And it's really, really important that we have both of those in our classrooms. And I hope educators, feel empowered that I can have a management strategy in my classroom. I can hold high expectations for my students, but I can still have that positive relationship with them that they need.
I can picture right now that somebody who's listening to this, they're in their car, or they're in their classroom, it's a parent or a teacher, and they're thinking, I've done all the things that they told me to do. I did the positive relationship things. I had lunch with my child or with my student. I've gone the extra to make sure I had these deep conversations. I've made sure we've had preferred activities. This just isn't working. And I want that person to know that there's more options, that it's not that either or. Exactly what you're saying. Like, I love that, because I'm seeing so many people just feel defeated because they're focused on the relationship and things still aren't going well. It's because there's another piece.
Right. Absolutely. I think when we think about building those relationships with students, sometimes then we often forget about ourselves as teachers. And really, we as teachers are really that important aspect and that important piece in keeping the classroom flowing. Yes, we can build relationships. Yes, we want what's best for students, but we also really have to reflect on ourselves. What relationship am I having with myself to keep going in this environment, or to, keep being the best for my students? And I think, in where we are in the political fields of education, that's really important right now for educators. We're burnout, we're tired, the standards are increasing, the expectations are there, but at some point we really have to reflect. I can be so much for my students, but I also have to be so much for myself as well.
So how do you convince yourself as a teacher that, like, today I did good enough? Like, I need to go, I need to set this boundary. I know you say something to the effect of that you have to give them your best and not what's left, but that requires boundaries. And then boundaries is one of those words that people hear and they're just like, it kind of feels like self-care. Like, seriously, like I say all the time, bubble baths don't fix IEPs, kind of thing. So, but you're talking about this in a different way. Like, what is some, like, a practical, like, you're just like, it's the end of the day, but you have to convince yourself I did okay.
Yeah. As teachers, we are our biggest critic. I say educators are one of the best known professions of individuals who care so hardly about students. However, we are our biggest critic. And that's problematic for a lot of us, because that's when we get into that mindset of, oh, you know what, I haven't done what I needed today for this student, or, well, I didn't, get to this part of the lesson, or this really didn't go as I planned. And really, we engulf our job into our personality, and into our self-worth. And I think we have to be really, really careful that we displace our job from our self-worth as a teacher. And there's no handbook, there's no guidance document about how to do that. And so, we read these blogs and read these, I post, and I've totally done those that, say things like, you should do X, Y, and Z to take care of yourself, and all this stuff. And really that kind of comes from within you. You have to be okay with what you've given to your students. You have to be okay with the job you've left at the door. I think it's really hard because a lot of us carry our jobs home with us. And that was the biggest struggle when I first came into teaching, was I was carrying my job home. I was carrying the traumas these kids had. It was really affecting my mental health, my emotional levels, and that was really kind of pouring back into the classroom. There's no strategy. There's no X, Y, and Z answer for how to, create those healthy boundaries. But we as educators can say that they're just really important, that you really find a way to kind of disconnect from your job, and determine that, you are different from being a teacher. You are also a person first.
That speaks volumes too to our special education parents who are listening. And I know that they're identifying as, I am, my child's parent, and I'm a special needs parent, and it's all the IEPs and all the doctors and all the things, and they lose themselves in that role with that extra label of, special education, special needs, disability, whatever's going on in their family. And it is so important to disconnect, and to everybody who thinks that we all have it figured out, the ones of us that talk about it, or we look like we have it all together on the outside. It's a conscious decision every day, and it can be a struggle on more days than others to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. One practical strategies I think I picked up and I continue to do to this day is every day I end my day and I say, we reflect with the team, our whole team, and what are two positives that happened today, what were really influential pieces or parts of the day, and what is something that we can improve on. And I think outweighing what are those positives over things that we can improve on is really a mindset that we need to have as not only special educators, but any sort of educator, but also parents as well. We have to give the best of us, whenever we're coming into this job every day.
Absolutely. So for me, when I'm transitioning out of work mode into, life mode, life outside of work mode, I have to have a transition activity for myself. Like, we use that term all the time for students, but it's really helpful. So I have my planner, and I have figured out that if I put my top 3 things that I need to get done the next day, and I do this brain dump, and it's out of my head and onto paper, I can then close the planner and move on. But if it's constantly swirling in my head of all these things that need to happen, because the end of the day can get rushed, the end of the day, you're like, I've got these loose ends. What if I just work for another hour or 2 hours or 3 hours? What if I just spend, for the parents who are doing the research, what if I just spend 15 more minutes on Google? What if I just call one more? What if I just jump into one Facebook group? At some point you have to, get it out of your head. And for me, that's writing it down with a physical pen and paper into my planner and saying, and I'm going to do this tomorrow. It's not over. I'm not done. It can continue, but not right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just really hard for us. I mean, that's really switching the mentality. And I think a lot of teachers then kind of feel that guilt, that they're not, and that's kind of where that guilt piece in, I'm not doing enough. I should be working. I should be doing X, Y, and Z this evening. And we really have to be mindful about how we can take that guilt away from us and really be okay with what we're giving students, and what we're giving our classroom or what we're giving our school. Because when we don't do those things, we don't set those healthy boundaries. This is why we're losing teachers to the profession, unfortunately. And we're just going to continue to spiral down something like that.
I hear you. For everybody who just nodded their head and went, yes, 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 yes. I want to encourage you to actually send me a message. We've got something that is brewing behind the scenes that at the time that this is being published, I can't even announce it yet with that. But if you are struggling to stay in the profession, if you are a teacher who is struggling to stay in the profession, if you are an administrator, a therapist, somebody who's on the school IEP team, that school part, and you're just like, I don't know if I can do this. My heart wants to, but I don't think that I can. I want you to send me a message and say, I heard that podcast. You told me to reach out. Please do that. So on that note, we got one other thing that I want to make sure that we talk about. And letting go is not a failure. Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
Absolutely. I mean, when I think of this, I really think of 2 concepts. Concept 1, a lot of times when we get students who come to programs, we get students who we're just not meeting their needs in a certain environment or a certain placement. We have to be okay with letting go of that student. And for so many of us, these students are our world. And so when we feel that they're moving on to something else, moving on to a different placement, moving on to a different environment, we feel that it's a direct reflection on us, that it's a failure on us. Letting go is not a failure. And for many of our students, letting them go means they're moving on to a different environment, a set of supports, a different placement that can better meet their needs, which is ultimately our number one goal for the student. How can we make them the most successful? And also in regards of letting go, we as teachers have to let go. We've talked about this, but we have to be okay with the job we've done each day. We have to reflect and be okay that I've given my all, I've given my best. It might not be 100%, it might not be 80%, but that's okay, and let go of that.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to keep in mind. And I'm trying to remember it myself. Quite often I have to do that whole like, come on, your 100% on one day, might be equal to 80% the next day, but that was your 100% for that day. There's other factors that are happening. It's a continuous, there's no, this is 100% and I can do this day after day after day, because life is ever changing. Our role is ever changing. The demands are ever changing, which means that what 100% looks like is ever changing. It's not less, it's different.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's give some positive reinforcement to our teachers and our parents who are now, looking at their placement decision that they made may not have been the best decision, and they've struggled, they've tried, they've had 99 IEP meetings, they've adjusted the accommodations, the modifications, they tried more IEP goals, less IEP goals, more relationships, less time. I mean, like so many different things. And the bottom line is it's time for a change. And everybody is feeling some level of devastation. It's hard. What do you say to that, to the parent and the teacher who are just like, it's time and we don't like it, but it's time?
Absolutely. I feel for so many people that the concept of education is really ingrained in their head that, I'm in a classroom, I'm sitting at my desk, I'm engaging in the lesson, completing the work. And really there's kind of this stigma of what education looks like. And I think to be successful in allowing parents or allowing, other educators to see how education can look differently is showing them that. How can we show that these parents that this is kind of what this kind of education or this environment might work best for this student? I think if we start to change that stigma of what classrooms look like and how it doesn't have to be a typical classroom, or it doesn't have to be a typical environment for a kid to be successful or feel successful, I think people will start to be okay with that. And I think that comes from people advocating, special educators advocating that, we can do this in our environments. It doesn't have to look typical. And your child still has a chance to, move back into that general education placement or move back to wherever they need. And so I really feel like a lot of it is changing that stigma. There's been such a stigma for, 30, 40 years about what special education looks like. And we actually think about what special education looks like today, it doesn't look like that. However, people still have that stigma that that's what it actually is.
Yeah, they do. It's
Yes.
something that we definitely need to change. I want to encourage everybody. I have a free download for you at iepchecklist.com. It's 12 questions that you can ask before your next IEP meeting. And that's going to include some placement questions. It's going to include some of these areas that we've just talked about. It helps you organize your thoughts. It is for parents and for teachers. It's the tough conversations, because that's what we're having today. We're having a tough conversation of the reality of change is hard. And in doing this the right way feels scary. big and it feels like it's a lot. So you are not alone. Go hop over to iepchecklist.com. And then Sam, we're going to make sure that everybody has all the links so they can find you and follow you and get all these amazing strategies. I know that we're going to continue the conversation with you inside of our special education inner circle members only event. So make sure to find the link for Special Ed Inner Circle here. And Sam, I just want to say thank you for being here today and bringing some of that hope and that light to a conversation that feels very dark on some days. And I appreciate just who you are and what you're doing in the field.
Yeah, thank you so much, Catherine. It's been so exciting. And I love talking anything about special education.
I know, we're obsessed. So, yeah. All right, everyone, we'll talk to you next time.